Hey Subfuries, have you ever read a story where the characters are going about their questy business when they find themselves in a mysterious place steeped in ancient magic and there are mysterious wizards who do sparkly mysterious magic things and the magic is never explained? Well, chances are that you're reading a story with a soft magic system. This is part 2 of 3 of a writing series, and last video we talked about hard magic systems, how to design them and how they fit into fictional worlds. I recommend watching that to get the full discussion. But to paraphrase, a hard magic system has clearly defined rules, consequences and limitations that govern what one can or cannot do with magic. Soft magic systems, on the other hand, often have a vague, undefined, or mysterious set of rules and limitations to being used. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings is probably the most famous example of this. Middle-earth is full of magical things, places, and people, from Agent Elrond to Saruman to your mother-in-law. But we don't really know how magic works, its limits, or what it requires. We know Gandalf is a wizard and all, but if you asked him about the specific limitations or costs of his wizardy magic powers, Gandalf gets a little vague. Now, while hard magic systems are largely about how you design magic to work, soft magic is more about how it can be worked into a good narrative, and that's what we'll be talking about today. This can boil down to thinking about 3 things: tension, point of view, and unpredictability. Brandon Sanderson writes stories with very hard magic, but his 3 laws of magic apply to writing stories anywhere on the spectrum from hard to soft. And Sanderson's first law is still incredibly important to soft magic stories. An author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. So firstly, tension. How well you can resolve tension and solve problems is essential to making a good story. This is where having a soft magic system can make things more difficult, because tension is incredibly difficult to build if your reader has no idea of the capabilities of your characters. But that's the thing about soft magic. The reader may not understand much about the limits or costs of it in your story. They don't know when your swashbuckling heroes are faced with a real challenge, whether the wizard can turn around with a wise bearded look, say, "Fear not, my pathetic mortal friend," and magic them away from danger. Using soft magic the reader cannot predict or doesn't understand to resolve conflict can feel like the author is just screaming, "A wizard did it," throwing a Deus Ex Machina in your face and expecting you to get on with your sorry life. Does this mean that you can never use soft magic to resolve tension? The answer is of course not. Magic systems can be anywhere on the spectrum from hard to soft, and there are plenty of stories that find a great balance between the two. A common way that this is written is that virtually anything is possible within the soft magic system, but individual characters might only have specific powers. Harry Potter is a relatively good example of this. Throughout the books, very few real limitations can be applied to magic as a whole. There could be a spell to accomplish almost anything a wizard might need. Want to kill someone? There's a spell for that. Want to repel muggles? There's a spell for that. Why drink to forget when you can just erase the memories? And Rowling regularly introduces new spells for things when she needs them, like Expecto Patronum in the 3rd book when creating spirit animals made of happiness became important to the plot. But Harry Potter himself has limited powers. He can't just make up a spell on the spot to do whatever he needs. His capabilities are limited to the spells he has learned and trained to use throughout the books. The tension is built up, maintained, and resolved well because when magic does solve problems in these stories, the reader understood Harry's capabilities, even if those abilities came from a soft magic system. Readers don't feel cheated because even though a wizard did do it, it doesn't feel like a wizard did it. You can have harder parts to a soft magic system without it being restricting for you as a storyteller, maintaining that sense of mystery and possibility as well as having limitations. It's just about striking that balance. Now, while readers may feel cheated if soft magic is used to miraculously resolve tension, it's virtually never a problem if it causes tension. It's a lot easier to have antagonists with vague or undefined powers than protagonists. This is why we might not understand the powers of the Mind Flayer in Stranger Things, but it still makes for an interesting villain, while we do understand Eleven's powers to an extent, because her powers are used to solve problems in the narrative. It's just important to remember to be consistent with that villain's powers later on. Likewise, it's perfectly okay to create challenges that the characters must solve with unexplained magic. So feel free to be the all-powerful, maniacal overlord you are and wreak havoc on the lives of your characters and make them sorry that they were ever born. Secondly, we need to talk about how soft magic fits in with your point of view characters. Whether you want to tell your story from the viewpoint of a magical or a non-magical character may change how you write. While this is in no way a rule, stories with softer magic tend to not be written from the perspective of magic users. uses. For example, the Black Company has a very soft magic system, and there are even main characters who use it regularly, but it's told from the perspective of Croker, a non-magical character. There are a number of reasons an author might want to do this. 1. If magic exists outside the point of view, you can align the reader with the main character, who may view magic as this mystical and unknown force in the world. That may be something that you want your reader to experience. Sanderson writes in his essay, The First Law of Magic, that soft magic preserves the sense of wonder in their books, to give the setting a fantastical feel. Soft magic books tend to want to indicate that men are a small part of the eternal and mystical workings of the universe. And that sense of the mysterious unknown can be harder to achieve if writing from the perspective of someone who must understand something of your magic. My favorite example of this is The Hobbit, because Tolkien. Tolkien tells his story through the eyes of Bilbo, a hobbit and handkerchief enthusiast. He adds to the tension in the story by using Bilbo's perspective. It reinforces that sense of the unknown in Mirkwood Forest, because Bilbo cannot possibly predict what enchantments, spells, or kind of racist elf kings he might face in there. It would be far more difficult for Tolkien to create that mysterious tension if the story was told by Gandalf, who would know a lot more about what to expect. But let's say that you want to write your soft magic story from the perspective of a witch or a wizard. How would you do that? There are an infinite number of ways that you can do this without breaking Sanderson's first law, but we are only going to talk about two that are particularly common and add really interesting dynamics to a story. One way is to write characters who have magic but do not control it directly, that only your eponymous hero can wield the ancient magical sword of plot convenience that also happens to indicate he should be king for some reason.
Strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
This trope can be seen all over the place, in King Arthur or Rincewind in The Light Fantastic, but Daenerys Targaryen is an excellent example of this. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Daenerys has this thing called Valyrian magic, which we know has a lot to do with fire and blood, but not much more than that. It's Valyrian magic that allows Dany to bond with dragons and survive standing in a funeral pyre at the end of the first book, but George R. R. Martin said Targaryens are not immune to fire. This was about the birth of Dany's dragons, which was unique, magical, wondrous, a miracle. In other words, it was an example of very soft magic. But while Dany is magical, it's not an ability that she controls. It doesn't break Sanderson's first law because it is used to make her story more interesting without resolving the conflicts in her story. Giving characters very little control over their magic allows you to keep the tension in the narrative, because the reader still feels it's the character's intelligence, ingenuity, and skill that are letting them solve problems. It's not the hero's magical ability to wield the sword that no one else can that allows them to defeat your totally not generic Dark Lord, it's that your hero worked and learned how to wield the sword. Fundamentally, soft magic can facilitate the resolution of your conflict, but not resolve it in and of itself. That comes across as, a wizard did it! A second way to write from the viewpoint of a soft magic character is with an element of unpredictability. While hard magic relies heavily on it being predictable and consistent, soft magic is allowed to be a lot more unpredictable, having not just the reader but the characters themselves be unsure of the limits or capabilities of their magic can be really interesting, and it retains that feeling of mysticism without you needing to explain how it works precisely. The character Melisandre in A Song of Ice and Fire is a fantastic example of this. She is one of the few viewpoint characters who actively try to use magic to accomplish things, but not only does the reader not fully understand the limits or rules of her powers, but neither does she entirely. For example, in the second book, she performs a huge sacrificial ritual for Stannis Baratheon, believing it would transform him into the savior of the world and English grammar.
Fewer.
But it didn't. Sometimes she can call on the Lord of Light for guidance, and other times it just doesn't work. While she is powerful, the rules of her magic aren't as clear as magical action X equals magical effect Y. But it's important to not use that unpredictability to solve problems too often. It comes across as weak writing if it works too regularly, because suddenly it doesn't feel unpredictable. It reads as if the author is just using magic to make the character succeed or fail whenever is most convenient for them. But the focus of unpredictable magic should not be on its ability to solve problems. Rather, its role in the story should center around, guess what? Its unpredictability and how that can enrich your narrative. Soft magic can add fantastical elements to a story in a way that is difficult to do with hard magic, and authors who do that well truly enhance their writing. For example, in many scenarios where characters do use unpredictable magic, it can often go horribly wrong and create more problems for the characters. In the Deathgate cycle, the more powerful the magic, the more drastic the unpredictable side effects will be. When one character performs necromancy, another random person will die. It can be fascinating to have viewpoint characters using this kind of magic in ways that truly affect the course of the story, but not just in positive ways, but negative and neutral ways as well. One of my favorite variations of unpredictable magic is from the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, which if you haven't read is the perfect balance between fantasy, comedy, and dreadful existentialism. In his books, magic has something of a personality. It isn't easy to control and can simply decide to do things on its own. If you really want to set your soft magic system apart, consider how its unpredictability could play into your story. Thinking about how hard it is to control, perhaps giving it some form of sentience that makes it not just a tool that could be used, but something to be incredibly wary of for your characters. And this is a major difference between hard and soft magic, where hard magic will go wrong because the practitioners didn't understand the rules or limits of the magic. Soft magic is more likely to go wrong simply because of its nature. Unpredictable magic can actually increase tension with a sense of risk to using it, and is less likely to feel like a wizard did it if the reader never loses that feeling of unpredictability or risk of disaster. What's difficult for authors is working to maintain that feeling. Of course, none of this means that your soft magic has to be unpredictable. This is just one way to make soft magic interesting, especially if you're writing from the viewpoint of magic users. Thirdly, you have to ask, how many magic systems do you want? Oftentimes, fantasy stories only have one magic system, like the Inheritance Cycle, the Belgariad, or Star Wars, but it is possible to include more than one magic system in your story if you like. In the Kingkiller Chronicles, there is Sympathy, which is a much harder magic system, but there's also things like naming magic or fey magic that are far softer. In A Song of Ice and Fire, there's an all-you-can magic buffet with the Faceless Men, the Old Gods, the Lord of Light, the Others, the Children of the Forest, and Valyrian magic. Few of them have much or anything to do with one another, and they are a mix of harder and softer magic systems. You can write a story with both, and which style is best is simply up to what fits for your narrative. Though if you really want to distinguish your novel, you might want to use multiple magic systems. It's not particularly common, and I often feel that it's a missed opportunity that hasn't been adequately explored in fantasy. Having multiple can add to the mysteriousness of your world, while having one may help establish that sense of predictability and consistency required for hard magic. And fourthly, style. Soft magic systems have an advantage of being extremely versatile and flexible. Authors are free to include ritualistic magic, spell magic, theurgical magic that calls on demons and angels, or ley lines that create wells of magical energy. They can use all of that without it feeling out of place. Hard magic systems, on the other hand, typically rely on one or a few styles at most. They need to be restricted for there to be clear rules. At its heart, I think harder magic is about how well an author designs the limitations, costs, and weaknesses, and how this can be cleverly used to solve problems in your story. While soft magic is not so much about solving problems, but adding to the narrative by opening up its possibilities and world-building opportunities. This was part 2 of a 3-part series analyzing magic systems, and you voted for it, so the third part I want to examine a particular magic system in detail. Avatar: The Last Airbender. How it's developed, how it fits in with Sanderson's third law of magic in particular, and where it works or doesn't work within the narrative. Question of the day, which do you prefer and why? Hard or soft? And I'm talking about magic systems. If you like what I make, please consider supporting me on Patreon so I can keep doing the work that I do. In the meantime, please come say hello to me on Twitter, Wattpad, Facebook, or email me stuff you've made. The address or links in the description below. Stay nerdy, Subfuries, and thank you very much for the massive response to my last video. I'll see you in the future.